The rain drummed against the windows of St. Mary's Cathedral as I watched my mother's casket being lowered into the ground. My stepmother, Victoria, stood beside me, her designer black dress perfectly tailored, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. She clutched a silk handkerchief, dabbing at her eyes with practiced precision. The October wind in Boston carried the scent of dying leaves and wet earth. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my 28 years. Victoria's sobs seemed to echo through the cemetery, drawing sympathetic looks from the other mourners. She was like a mother to me, Victoria whispered to Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine grief. I watched as she accepted condolences from family friends, her performance flawless. The way she held herself, the timing of her tears, even the way she leaned into my father's arm for support. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. My mother had always been cautious about Victoria, though she'd never said anything directly. Now, standing in this cold cemetery, I wondered if Mom had seen something I'd missed. After the service, we gathered at the family home on Beacon Hill, the same house where I'd grown up. The Victorian mansion felt different now, emptier despite being filled with people. Victoria moved through the rooms like a gracious hostess, accepting sympathy and sharing memories of my mother. She'd only been married to my father for 3 years, but she spoke as if she'd known Mom for decades. I found myself in the kitchen, helping prepare coffee and sandwiches, when I overheard her on the phone. Her voice was different, colder, more calculating than the grief-stricken tone she'd used all day. "Yes, I understand the account numbers," she said quietly into her cell phone, turning her back to the doorway. "The funeral is over. We can proceed with the transfers tomorrow morning." My blood ran cold as I realized what I was hearing. She was talking about my mother's accounts, the inheritance that was supposed to come to me. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. The girl suspects nothing. She's too busy grieving to pay attention to business matters. The casual cruelty in her voice made my stomach turn. This woman had been playing a role, and I'd been too naive to see through it. I spent the rest of the evening watching Victoria more carefully, noting the way her grief seemed to turn on and off like a switch. When people were looking, she was the perfect grieving widow. When she thought no one was watching, her expression became cold and calculating. As the last guests left, she excused herself early, claiming exhaustion. I heard her car pull out of the driveway around midnight, which struck me as odd. Where would she be going at this hour? I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me suspicious of everyone. But the phone conversation kept replaying in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The next morning, I woke to find Victoria's bedroom empty. Her closet cleared out. Panic set in as I called the bank, only to discover that all of my mother's accounts had been emptied overnight. The safety deposit box had been accessed, and everything of value was gone. Victoria had vanished completely, taking with her not just the money, but also my mother's jewelry, important documents, and family heirlooms that had been passed down for generations. I stood in the empty house, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The woman who had cried at my mother's funeral, who had held my hand during the service, had stolen everything that was rightfully mine. I called the police immediately, but they informed me that technically, Victoria had legal access to the accounts as my father's wife. My father had died 2 years earlier, and apparently, Victoria had been listed as a beneficiary on several accounts. The officers were sympathetic, but explained that without evidence of fraud, there was little they could do. I felt helpless and betrayed, wondering how my mother could have left me so vulnerable. The family lawyer, Mr. Patterson, was out of town at a conference, and his assistant could only schedule an appointment for the following week. I spent the next few days in a haze of anger and disbelief, trying to understand how someone could be so cruel. When I finally met with Mr. Patterson, he seemed genuinely shocked by what had happened. He pulled out a thick folder and began reviewing the documents with a frown. "This is very strange, Sarah," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Your mother was extremely careful about her estate planning. She updated her will just 6 months ago." He showed me copies of documents that I'd never seen before, detailing specific provisions she'd made. She was particularly concerned about protecting your inheritance from any potential complications with Victoria. His words gave me a glimmer of hope, but I wasn't sure what they meant practically. "There's something else," Mr. Patterson continued, his expression growing more serious. "Your mother gave me very specific instructions about how to handle her estate. She was worried about Victoria's intentions and took some unusual precautions." He reached into his safe and pulled out a sealed envelope. "She told me to give this to you only if something like this happened. She said you'd know what to do with it." My hands trembled as I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting, along with several documents I didn't recognize. The letter began, "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true." The letter explained that my mother had discovered Victoria's plan months before her death. She'd hired a private investigator and learned that Victoria had done this before, marrying older men and then stealing from their families after they died. My mother had been gathering evidence, but her illness had progressed too quickly for her to expose Victoria publicly. Instead, she'd created a backup plan, a way to protect me and ensure that justice would be served. "There's a real will," the letter continued, "hidden where Victoria would never think to look. And there's evidence that will prove everything she's done." The documents in the envelope included copies of the private investigator's report, bank records showing suspicious transactions, and most importantly, the location of my mother's actual will. She'd hidden it in a safety deposit box at a different bank, one that Victoria didn't know about. The key was taped to the back of a family photo in my childhood bedroom, disguised as part of the frame. I rushed home and found the key exactly where the letter said it would be. My mother had thought of everything, even leaving me a trail of breadcrumbs to follow when I needed them most. At the bank, I retrieved the real will and discovered that my mother had been far more clever than I'd ever imagined. Not only had she left me everything, but she'd also set up a trust that would be impossible for Victoria to access. The will contained specific language about what would happen if anyone tried to steal from the estate. There were provisions for criminal prosecution and civil recovery, all carefully crafted by my mother and her attorney. I felt a mixture of grief and admiration for the woman who had protected me even from beyond the grave. She'd known exactly what kind of person Victoria was, and had prepared accordingly. Armed with the real will and the evidence my mother had gathered, I returned to Mr. Patterson's office. His face lit up when he saw the documents, and he immediately began making phone calls. Within hours, we had contacted the police, the FBI, and the probate court. The case against Victoria was strong, with clear evidence of fraud and theft. The judge agreed to an emergency hearing, and subpoenas were issued for Victoria's financial records. It was clear that this wasn't her first time, and law enforcement was very interested in her pattern of behavior. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I spent the time helping investigators piece together Victoria's trail. They discovered that she'd been married 4 times before, each time to a wealthy older man who had died within a few years of the marriage. In each case, she'd managed to steal significant amounts of money before disappearing. My mother had been her most recent victim, but she'd also been her most prepared opponent. The evidence was overwhelming, and the authorities were confident they could bring her to justice. As I sat in the courtroom waiting for the hearing to begin, I felt my mother's presence with me. She'd given me the tools I needed to fight back, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Victoria was nowhere to be found, but the judge proceeded with the hearing anyway. When he read the real will aloud, I saw the shocked faces of everyone in the room. The provisions were clear and detailed, leaving no doubt about my mother's intentions. But what surprised me most was the final clause, one that my mother had kept secret even from me. "I leave to my daughter Sarah not only my material possessions," the judge read, "but also the responsibility of ensuring that justice is served." Victoria's crimes must not go unpunished, and I trust Sarah to see this through. The will then detailed a fund my mother had set up specifically for legal expenses, ensuring that I would have the resources to pursue Victoria wherever she had gone. She'd thought of everything, even the emotional toll this would take on me. There was a letter for me alone, expressing her love and her confidence in my strength. The judge's reading continued with more surprises. My mother had secretly documented every suspicious thing Victoria had done, creating a comprehensive record of her behavior. She'd even set up surveillance cameras in the house, capturing footage of Victoria going through private papers and making secret phone calls. The evidence was so thorough that the authorities were able to freeze Victoria's accounts and track her movements. Within days, she was arrested at a luxury resort in the Caribbean, trying to assume yet another false identity. The trial was a media sensation, with Victoria's other victims coming forward to testify. I watched as the woman who had cried at my mother's funeral was revealed to be a calculating predator who had destroyed multiple families. The evidence my mother had gathered was crucial in securing a conviction. Victoria was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all her victims. I was able to recover not only my inheritance, but also help bring closure to the other families she had destroyed. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, I felt a profound sense of closure. My mother had not only protected me financially, but had also given me the means to seek justice. The inheritance was substantial, but more importantly, it came with the knowledge that my mother had loved me enough to fight for me even after she was gone. I used part of the money to establish a foundation helping other victims of inheritance fraud, ensuring that my mother's legacy would continue to protect vulnerable families. The experience changed me in ways I hadn't expected. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, capable of fighting for what was right even when the odds seemed impossible. My mother had seen that strength in me and had trusted me to use it wisely. As I walked away from the courthouse, I carried with me not just financial security, but the knowledge that love and preparation could triumph over greed and deception. The woman who had tried to steal my inheritance had ultimately given me something more valuable: the realization of my own resilience and the power of a mother's love. The foundation I established became my life's work, helping other families navigate the complex world of inheritance fraud. We provided legal assistance, emotional support, and education about protecting estates from predators like Victoria. Each case we handled reminded me of my mother's wisdom and her determination to protect those she loved. The money Victoria had stolen was recovered, but the real victory was in preventing her from hurting anyone else. My mother's plan had been perfect, down to the smallest detail, and it had not only saved me but had also helped save countless others. Years later, I still think about that October day in the cemetery, watching Victoria's performance at my mother's funeral. I remember feeling suspicious, but not trusting my instincts. Now I understand that my mother had been preparing me for this moment my entire life, teaching me to be observant, to question things that seemed too good to be true. The inheritance I received was more than money or property. It was a lesson in the importance of being prepared, of protecting those we love, and of never underestimating the power of a mother's foresight and love. The house on Beacon Hill became a symbol of my mother's victory over Victoria's schemes. I renovated it completely, turning it into a place of healing rather than a reminder of betrayal. The family heirlooms that Victoria had stolen were returned, and I displayed them proudly, each piece telling a story of survival and justice. Friends and family often commented on how much I'd changed, how I'd grown stronger and more confident. I always credited my mother, whose love had given me the tools to fight back when it mattered most. The final surprise came a year after the trial, when Mr. Patterson called me into his office one more time. He had discovered another document my mother had left, this one to be opened only after Victoria's conviction. Inside was a letter expressing her pride in me and her confidence that I would use the inheritance wisely. She'd also left instructions for a scholarship fund for young women studying law, ensuring that future generations would have the tools to fight against predators like Victoria. Even in death, my mother continued to protect and nurture, her love extending far beyond her own family. As I write this story, Victoria is still serving her sentence, and the foundation continues to grow. We've helped hundreds of families recover stolen inheritances and protected countless others from similar schemes. The judge's reading of my mother's real will that day in court didn't just change my life. It changed the lives of everyone Victoria had hurt, and everyone she might have hurt in the future. My mother's legacy lives on, not just in the money she left me, but in the justice she made possible and the protection she continues to provide through the work we do. The woman who vanished with my inheritance after the funeral taught me that evil exists in the world, but my mother taught me that good can prevail with careful planning and unwavering love. The real will wasn't just a legal document, it was a testament to a mother's determination to protect her child at any cost. When the judge read those words in court, revealing my mother's true intentions, I realized that I had never truly been alone. She had been fighting for me all along, and her love had given me everything I needed to win.